What if I told you there's a leadership style that can help you whether you're leading a startup, running a pilot school, or a multi-billion-dollar corporation? Let's get into it. G'day, are you seeking to be a high-performance CEO or develop personal leadership and be a CEO in your own life? Then you've come to the right place, because we share real experiences from CEOs for you to learn from. And so you don't miss out, click the like button, subscribe, and turn on all notifications. If you're a leader, then you've probably heard yourself saying something like, why don't they seem to understand what I'm saying? Why can't they just do it themselves? Why do I need to keep stepping in? Well, if you've ever heard yourself say that, then I think this tool called the 4-phase leadership method could really help. Let's get into it. So what is 4-phase leadership? Effectively, it gives you some guidance on how to adjust your style based on the team member or team member's situation. It plots it on an axis, the x-axis being from less directive to more directive, and the y-axis being less supportive to more supportive. And it takes you through 1, 2, 3, and 4 stages. The first stage being quite directive or asserting, they call it. Stage 2 would be training, so training them. Phase 3 would be assuring, and phase 4 is self-sustaining. And that's ultimately the goal, to move your team members to that 4th phase where they're fully running by themselves with a minimum amount of effort and oversight from you. So why would you want to learn and adopt a 4-phase leadership approach? Well, there are many problems that come up in companies that are as a result of poor leadership. Low quality outcomes, wasted efforts, frustration, poor engagement, poor working culture, and ultimately company failure. And some, if not all of these, can be avoided with good leadership styles. Many years ago, back in the 90s, I was very new to management, and I had 20 people reporting directly to me in a sophisticated and difficult environment where I didn't have the direct support of my management. They were on remote and they were quite disengaged. One particular employee became dissatisfied with me and my leadership style to the point where he rallied several other employees to go overseas to meet my superior and complain about me. And luckily for me, my superior supported me and understood what was going on. And ultimately I kept my job, but I really could have lost it at that point very, very easily. What it did do is it gave me a kick in the pants to improve my leadership style, improving my communication, my empathy, a whole range of things, including the adoption of a 4-phase leadership style, which we're going to talk about now. So what is the solution to being a good leader? Well, I believe leaders are made, they're not necessarily born. To make yourself and to be a good leader takes some work. There's training or building the knowledge, there's practicing the skills that are required, there's setting up some measurement parameters, getting feedback and those sorts of things, and then reiterating. Ultimately, it's about willingness to recognize a change is needed, adopting that, and learning how to avoid it. I believe anyone can be a good leader with time, practice, tools, and a willingness to do so. So what I'm going to do now is talk about each of the 4 phases, and I'm going to use a worked example as we go through the 4 phases to express what I mean. It's not one based in management, it's one based in the very real world of learning to fly an airplane. I used to be a flight instructor, and I used to teach people how to fly. And we used to say, if you can teach them how to fly, you can teach them anything. And we're going to go through the process of getting someone to fly an aeroplane from a perspective of changing leadership style as we go from them not knowing anything about flying an aeroplane to being able to fly solo around a circuit, take off and land an aeroplane without anybody else in the cockpit. So imagine you front up to a flight school to learn how to fly a light aeroplane. Now, like most people, you've probably been in an airliner, you're familiar with that, you may have even flown a simulator, but this is real life. This is life and death. Is the instructor going to just send you out to the aeroplane to go and fly it by yourself? No. He's going to take what's called an advising role or a directive role. He's going to essentially take you under your wing and step by step take you through everything to get you safely into the air and back down again. So what sort of behaviors does the leader in this case, or the flight instructor, take? Well, there's going to be a lot of talking from his point of view. He's going to be everything from getting your name and credit card details to the basics of flying an aeroplane, to what books you might want to read. And then he's probably going to take you out to the aeroplane and walk you around the aeroplane so you're just familiar with it, where you're going to sit, what he's going to do, what you're going to do. And then he's going to come back inside and give you a complete briefing. And in that briefing, you'll be sitting there very passively listening to all the things that he's going to take you through. The first lesson is called Effects of Controls, which effectively he's going to demonstrate to you what each of the controls does, how the elevators are controlled and it controls the pitch of the aeroplane, how the ailerons control the roll of the aeroplane, and how the rudders control the yaw of the aeroplane. Then he's going to take you out after that long briefing about how the aeroplane is going to work, and he's going to do all the things necessary to get the aeroplane into the air, cruising along, and then he's going to demonstrate how the elevators work when you pull back on the stick, how the ailerons work when you rotate the stick, and how the pedals work when you press them. And he's going to ask you to just copy what he did and feel for yourself. And I think you can see in this first phase just how much work there is by the instructor to start the training process when somebody really knows very little. So we would call that a very high level of directiveness, a very, very high on directive behavior. There's very specific instructions given at a very low level. For example, notice how when I pull back on the elevator, the nose of the aeroplane rises. Notice how when I push forward on the controls, the nose of the aeroplane falls. Now I'm going to hand over to you, new student. You pull back on the elevator. You push forward on the elevator. Notice what you see, what you feel. It's extremely directive, not giving really much control to the student. Now this could be akin to somebody who's just started their very first day at work. You need to get their details, their resume, get them sorted out on payroll. Every single step needs to be taken through an exhaustive detail. Then introduction to the project, introduction to the team, how you behave, where the coffee is in the coffee room. All of those details. It's called directive behavior, and somebody needs to take that role. So if you are the person introducing a new person to the company, you need to use phase 1 leadership, just the same way a pilot instructor would for a brand new student. As we move on, we move to a new phase called phase 2, which is about training or coaching. And in the pilot scenario, the student's probably done about 5 hours. So they're familiar with many things in the cockpit and the aeroplane, and they've been starting to do some things by themselves. They can probably fly the aeroplane to some extent around the training area without too much input from you. They know a little bit about preparing the paperwork and the plane, but there's still a lot of uncertainty. And so rather than being so directive as we were with phase 1, we start moving to being more supportive. They're learning at a very fast rate, and they're starting to enact and put into practice some of the things that they've learned. And it's very important then to be supportive, to show that what they're doing is on the right track, is moving in the right direction. So we call this upping the supportive behavior, but still with the directive behavior. So things like talking about new experiences in great detail again. At level 5 or lesson 5, they're probably doing stalls, steep turns, some of the more advanced handling skills that are needed. So they're still being challenged, and they're being challenged at a very high rate. And they're also starting to do some things by themselves, like flying the aeroplane straight and level. And they need encouragement and support. They need to be told when it's really looking good, what performance parameters, plus or minus 100 feet, for example, whether that's good, whether they're achieving those metrics. So we've moved from just purely directive to directive and supportive behavior. And this is called training. We're backing off a lot of the interaction. We're not being quite as directive, but we still need to provide quite a lot of that. Now, how would that play out in a work situation? Let's say, for example, you brought on a new developer into the company. They've done all the introductory stuff. They've probably been there maybe a week or so, and they know the team, they know what's going, and they're starting to take on small pieces of responsibility. But they still have a lot to learn, and they're needing a lot of support and guidance. So support in the form of encouragement, knowing what the performance parameters are, like what their output needs to be in certain areas, but also some new work needs to be given to them in a very directive manner. This is what I need to do, A, B, C. So that's phase 2. Now we move on to phase 3. And this is where we see a shift away from directive behavior, but maintaining the supportive behavior. So an example of that is where the pilot is now at about lesson 10. We're getting them sort of ready to handle the aeroplane pretty much on their own. They have all the basic knowledge, but now it's about refining those skills. They don't need to be told so much what to do. They just need corrections on the things that they're doing. So they've probably done a whole bunch of circuits and bumps, and some of those are working out really well and others are not so great. And the instructor is now saying, well, okay, that was a bit of a rough landing. It's probably because you didn't have the approach speed stabilized or whatever the feedback might be. But mostly at lesson 10, students pretty much flying the plane, preparing the paperwork, preparing the aeroplane, making sure they really understand everything that needs to be done, but they don't quite have the skills yet. So it's practice. And this is where this leadership style needs to shift away from being directive to being very supportive. Again, performance, feedback, and adjustments and encouragement. Okay, so how does that relate to the work environment? So now your new employee, your developer has come on, he's been with the team for several weeks, and his projects are completely his, he knows what to do, but he doesn't necessarily know how to do it really well. He doesn't necessarily know who the right people are that can support him and when to use them and when not to. And those little adjustments are what's required at this point. And they need encouragement because they're really flying pretty much on their own now, but they don't have the confidence, they don't have the experience to feel confident at this point. When you move between these phases, isn't cut and dry, and it's very much a question of how the leader interprets the situation. I'm using the pilot example because I think it's very clear, but in a work environment, it's really going to vary, and only you are going to know with experience and dealing with people of all different situations, how and when to move in. That's phase 3. Now, the final phase in the 4-phase leadership is, of course, number 4. 4, we're actually backed off already on our directive behavior. Now we're going to back off on our supportive behavior. In the pilot example, you're really getting the student ready for their first solo. That means they're going to take the aeroplane by themselves with nobody else in the cockpit for the first solo around the circuit pattern, taking off and landing the aeroplane completely on their own. Nobody else in the cockpit. Usually this is done as one circuit and then they report back to the instructor. And often after that point, they're pretty much taking circuits by themselves and they're more and more inclined to fly by themselves. So what's the role of the instructor? Well, he can't really help him when he's in the cockpit by himself. So he needs to prepare that student for being on their own. So it's backing off on the supportive behavior as well. There's no one there to do the corrections and adjustments and the positive reinforcement. Often what happens in that case is the student is now briefing the instructor, and a good instructor will encourage that and get them to do as much of the briefing work as possible, pointing out how they're going to do things ahead of when they actually do it. Really, at this point, everything should be going smoothly, and if the performance is good enough when they're flying around with the instructor in this phase 4 and the briefings are all good, the instructor will get out, walk across to the flight school and go and watch from the window as the student makes their first takeoff, flight and landing. Obviously, there's a lot of trust involved. Trust with the aeroplane, trust with the person's life, and the student needs to demonstrate that they've got the capabilities to accept that trust. And the only one that can really judge that is the instructor. In that environment, it's often not a junior instructor who makes that decision. It may be one of the more senior instructors that goes and flies with the person to see if they're really up to scratch. So how does that relate to the work environment? Well, this is where you really would be giving someone a project of their own. This is their own project. You tell me how you're going to do this project. Or maybe the project's already running. You tell me, Mr. Employee, what you think you need to be doing. That really frees you up as a leader to go and do some other important tasks. Because this whole 4-phase leadership illustrates just how much effort there is in bringing on new staff and bringing on new team members. And you need to get comfortable with bringing people on all the time. And you can't obviously do that for everyone all the time. So the amount of effort goes from very, very high and then it tapers off to very low throughout the 4-phase leadership process. So let's recap. 4-phase leadership is a way to change your leadership style as you bring on a new team member. And it's on 2 axes, one which is directive, usually on the x-axis, and one which is supportive on the y-axis. We move from phase 1, where we're highly directive with no support. Emotional support is very much telling. Moving to training, where you're both supporting and directing, to highly supportive and less directive, to less supportive and less directive, and really allowing someone to complete their tasks pretty much on their own. So was that clear? What does 4-phase leadership do for us? Well, I believe it creates a common language of performance. So we now have a framework, and it's even possible that you could talk to your employees specifically about what leadership style you are going to use. So as they come in, you could say, well, look, this is the 4-phase leadership doctrine that we use here, and I'm going to be using directive, and then we're going to move you through the phases till you get to phase 4. Common language, an understanding of how the style is going to change, and sets a nice expectation. Secondly, it accounts for this multi-directional influence. So if you involve the employees and the team in this structure, they will understand when you're using the leadership style and when you don't, when you can change it and move between that, and you can involve others into this, what can be a very complex situation. So we use the pilot example because it's quite simple. There's only 2 people involved, and it's very, very staged. It's a very set program. It uses task specificity as a measure of performance versus typecasting employees. So if the task is very difficult or the project is very difficult, it may require that you spend more time as a leader in phases 1, 2, and 3 before you can get to 4. If it's a very simple project, you might be able to go straight to 4, right? So it gives you the ability to move quickly between the phases depending on the difficulty of the task and how much involvement you need as a leader. It allows leaders to effectively drive behavior change. So it's not just about the leaders changing in behavior, we need our team to change their behavior. Very clearly illustrated with the pilot example, where you were flying as an instructor at the start, but then they're flying very much at the end and completely solo. So it gives you a vehicle to drive change as well in your team. And it accelerates the progress of staff development. If they understand the process that they need to follow, they're going to strive to move to those advanced phases. And they know when they got to go to phase 4 quickly, or move through 1 through 3 and 4, or they can shift between 2 and 3. And I've had dialogue with my team about, why they're stuck in phase 2 or phase 3 or even phase 1, and how we can move into those, and where do we think we are in this 4-phase leadership style. And it teaches leaders to interpret and effectively respond to their environment. So it's not like a one cookie cutter approach where we're always going to be acting this way. We're actually going to have a dynamic, situationally dependent leadership style. And leaders need to know that every situation is different. So how would you, or how could you, implement phase 4 leadership in your organization? Well, I believe there's 4 competencies that you need to work on as a leader to embrace, adopt, and roll this out. So the first one is diagnosing individuals' performance in readiness to complete the task. Very easy when a new student walks into the flight school to know they know nothing, and so you can start from 0. You need to be good at assessing each of your team members' capability for the task and know therefore where to fit them into the phase sequence. Then the second competence is adapting your leadership behavior based on the diagnosis. So you need to be good at directive behavior and good at supporting behavior, and knowing when to emphasize one, emphasize the other, or de-emphasize both. In fact, advance both in phase 2, for example. So you need to have those skills and tools ready, and the communication skills ready to roll that out. Number 3 is to communicate and influence the approach in a manner that followers can both understand and accept. And I think one of the really helpful tools would be this video, or a document on it, or teaching people how to do phase 4 leadership. There's a framework there. It's logical, it's easy to follow. So therefore it can be a very good tool for getting people to accept changes as you go through the different phases. And then number 4 is to advance by managing the movement towards higher performance. So where is higher performance? Higher performance occurs when you can delegate back off your involvement in a project and allow others to run with the project. As CEOs, as leaders, we're always busy, often overloaded. It's very important that we can delegate, and delegate effectively. and making sure that our team understands what delegation is, why that helps the performance of them, how it satisfies them in their role, satisfies the company, the leadership and the structure, and all good things come from improved performance. So what are some of the common mistakes that are made when we roll out 4-phase leadership? Well, number one would be indirectly diagnosing the phase that we're operating in. When someone first comes into the organisation, it's pretty clear they're in phase 1, but when do they move out of phase 1 into phase 2? And if the diagnosis is incorrect, then the leadership style will never match the needs. So perhaps we're using phase 4 and they're stuck at phase 2. So they're expecting highly directive and highly supportive, and you're expecting to totally delegate. So incorrectly diagnosing the phase. So a way to correct that is to ask your team member what phase they think they're in, what leadership style is going to help them succeed, and then adapt your style accordingly once you agree to the phase that you're in. Another common, probably the most common error of anyone that's actually learnt and trying to do this is not being able to adapt the leadership style to suit the phase. Quite often we have a personality which determines the type of approach we use to communicate with people, and this requires a flexibility in the communication style. We're not all highly directive. Some of us are very supportive, some of us are not, and we all have our own biases and tendencies, and we tend to fall into a certain leadership style, especially if we're stressed, overworked. We tend to fall back to patterns of behavior, which may not be the most ideal for the situation. So this is something that requires constant work and effort. Again, talking to your team members about what phase they're in, what they would expect to see from you, and having an open dialogue about the leadership style can help train you to become better at it. Self-reflection, of course. Did I handle that best in terms of managing my employee at that particular phase? And I still make mistakes. So recently I was expecting one of my staff to be in phase 4 where they were completely running the project. I found out that certain things were not being done to what I felt was good enough. So we've moved back to phase 3 and perhaps even phase 2 where I'm a bit more heavily involved because there's some key areas where they are struggling, not aware of. A little bit more directive until I can get them back to being supportive and then try again at phase 4. So in conclusion, 4-phase leadership is a great tool that can help you change your leadership style based on the situation, particularly relevant where you've got new team members coming in or you're bringing a staff member up to a new high performance level. Some of the foundations that I think are important to really embrace as a leader, and also in this case with the 4-phase leadership, is that ability to seek first to understand. So understand the situation that the team member is involved in and the project is offering, and then mapping that to the correct situation. As I've said before, CEO to me doesn't stand for Chief Executive Officer, it stands for Communications Executive Officer. And a lot of the themes that I roll out are all about communication, communicating better. And that's certainly true here, where you have to change your communication style to suit your leadership style. 4-phase leadership I've used effectively for 20 years. I'm still learning, I'm still failing at it, I'm still misjudging the situation, but I think it's always a really helpful framework, and it's something I strongly encourage you to use as a leader in your business and in your personal life, if you can do so. If you are facing a problem like this in your business or something similar in a related topic, then please follow the links in the description. We offer a free session for one candidate every week. And so you don't miss out on any of the content here, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button and turn on all notifications. I hope that helps, and thanks for watching.